Yo, 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 welcome back to episode number 6 of the Fat Boy Fight Club podcast. I'm your host, Andre Roy, coming to you live from sunny Tempe, Arizona. It is January 26th. It is a Sunday. If you're listening to this on a Monday, I hope it's getting your weekend started off right. If you're listening to it bright on Sunday, thank you for being one of the 20 plus people that listen to it when it drops. So I appreciate all the love. Man, today we got a lot to talk about. UFC Raleigh, Bellator 238, Cyborg versus Julia Budd, and we got some fun announced fights. The website's up. Throw some stuff in there like that. New merch is dropping soon. So yeah, let's get ready to hop into this episode of the Fat Boy Fight Club podcast. Every single episode is that talking about recently announced fights that get me jazzed. And the first one that we're going to talk about is Edmund Shabazian versus Derek Brunson. That's going to be happening at UFC 248 on March 7th. This is in the middleweight division. Shabazian is looking stellar right now. He's looking very good. Derek Brunson is sort of like the gatekeeper of the middleweight division right now. So I don't really know how this fight's going to turn out, man. I like Derek Brunson because he's from North Carolina and that's where I'm from. But that being said, Edmund Shabazian is a very, very tough fighter. You have Derek Brunson coming off of 2 wins over Ian Heinisch and Elias Theodoro. Both are unanimous decisions. But against upper echelon strikers such as Israel Adesanya, Anderson Silva, Robert Whittaker, guys like that, he tends to shit the bed a little bit. Let's just be honest. Israel TKO'd him in the first round. Anderson Silva decision. Robert Whittaker TKO'd him in the first round. I feel like Derek Brunson is a very, very good fighter. He's 20-7. Which, I mean, is a phenomenal record, especially for spending the last, the last 8 years in the UFC. Yeah, the last 8 years in the UFC. He fought Chris Lieben at UFC 155 in December 29th of 2012. So yeah, my dude's been in the UFC for 8 years, but he's facing a 22-year-old highlight reel of Edmund Shabazian, who's coming off of a knockout head kick over Brad Tavares back at UFC 244 in New York. He looked really good in that. He beat Jack Marshman by rear naked choke, beat Charles Bird by TKO, beat Darren the Dentist Stewart by split decision, and he's a veteran of the Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series where he fought Antonio Jones and defeated him by TKO. My dude's only went to decision 1 time out of 11 fights, and he's just getting better. I think with that all being said, I think Edmund Shabazian is probably going to put on one hell of a show. This fight, I believe, is in Brooklyn. Nope. Scratch that. It is in T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. So I think he's going to want to go out there and showcase to the Las Vegas crowd that, man, he's arrived and he's ready for that upper echelon of the middleweight division. I got Edmund Shabazian probably winning this by TKO, maybe in the first or second round. The next fight that we're going to talk about is Shamil Abdurakhimov versus Cyril Gagné. This is a heavyweight fight that's happening at UFC 249, April 18th. Let's hop on the laptop real quick to do a little bit of research on UFC 249. I believe that is in Barclays Center, New York City, New York, and that is headlined by Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson. The co-main event is Uriah Hall and Ronaldo Jacare Souza. And then you got Rose Namajunas versus Jessica Andrade on that fight card as well. Man, Cyril Gagné, he is a heavyweight prospect, and he is looking pretty damn good right now. He's staying very active, which I like seeing. And he's only 29 years old. He's coming out of Paris, France. He trains with Francis Ngannou, and he's been in the UFC since last year. He's reeled off 2 submissions and a decision over Tanner Boser in his last fight. He's 7-0 in Muay Thai, and he's a very, very good prospect in the heavyweight division. Fighting a guy like Shamil, who is pretty good, but he's coming off of a TKO loss to Curtis Blades. Before that, he reeled off 3 straight wins over Marcin Tybura, Andrei Arlovsky, Chase Sherman. And then he faced Derek Lewis before that, where he got destroyed in the 4th round. But Shamil has some really good wins on his record, such as Andrei Arlovsky, Walt Harris, Anthony Hamilton. But he has lost to guys that have heavy hands, such as Curtis Blades and Derek Lewis. And Cyril Gagné is a very big boy and holds very, very, very 100% power in his fist. So I think that Shamil needs to get this fight to the ground. That being said, Gagné is no slouch on the ground. He has a heel hook submission and an arm triangle choke submission. Also, in his first fight, according to Tapology, in Canada, he has a submission via front choke at TKO Fight Night 1 in Quebec, Canada, back on August 2nd, 2018. Man, this fight seems to be heading the way of probably Cyril Gagné because of the fact that he is a very heavy-handed puncher, has a decent submission game, and can go to the ground and not really be scared of anything that Shamil brings to the fight. So I really have Cyril Gagné probably going out there and getting a unanimous decision win. But that's a fight that I'm really, really excited for. The next fight is a female fight at UFC Lincoln in April. On April 25th, you have Cynthia Calvillo versus Antonina Shevchenko. This fight is another kind of grappler versus striker match. You have Cynthia Calvillo, who hopefully she comes in on weight this time. She's missed weight a good amount. I believe it has been, 1, 2, 3. In her last 5 fights, she's missed weight 3 times. And she's coming off of a draw to Marina Rodriguez at Overeem versus Rosenstreut back in Washington, D.C. in December. She beat Courtney Casey back in February. And she has a submission via rear naked choke over Polyana Botelho back at the UFC fight card in Buenos Aires 2 years ago. Cynthia Calvillo, if she gets her weight in order, I feel like she can be, making a run for the top. But that being said, she has a tough test in front of her. Antonina is no joke. She beat Lucy Pudilova back in August at UFC Fight Night, Covington versus Lawler by rear naked choke. She's a very, very decorated striker. She is the older sister of Valentina, aka the death row chamber dude of the women's strawweight division. She's just running through everybody. But that being said, Antonina has had trouble with some good grapplers such as Roxanne Modafferi, who is coming off of a win over Macy Barber. So I feel like if Cynthia wants to get this win, that she should probably look to take it to the ground. Cynthia, she's not a slouch on the feet, but she's not to the, prowess of Antonina. Excuse me, I know that's gross. But, I think that she will be able to push the pace. If Antonina doesn't get the early, TKO finish, I think that maybe Cynthia can pull this off via unanimous decision. So that's what I'm going to go for on this fight. I think that Cynthia Calvillo does have what it takes to keep the pressure on Shevchenko and to push her up against the cage, but she needs to keep the fight on the cage. She can't fight at distance with Shevchenko. She's a sniper from out at distance, and I feel like she can probably piece up Calvillo if she's not careful. So my prediction, as I already stated, is going to be Cynthia Calvillo winning this fight via unanimous decision. And that brings us to the headliner of UFC Lincoln, and that is my man, Anthony Smith, going up against one of the oldest tenured people in the UFC light heavyweight division, and that is Glover Teixeira. This fight will be Anthony Smith's first fight back after losing his title fight against John Jones. Oh, scratch that. He has actually beat Alexander Gustafsson. That's my bad. I forgot about that fight. He beat Alexander Gustafsson in the 4th round in Stockholm via rear naked choke. So he's going to be coming back and facing Glover Teixeira. And Glover Teixeira, he's 40 years old. He's fighting Lionheart, and Glover is on a 3-fight winning streak, which has fights won over Carl Roberson, Ian Kutelaba, and Nikita Krylov. The fight before he fought Carl was a unanimous decision loss to Corey Anderson, who is looking really good right now. This fight is 2 strikers. And I think that I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Glover Teixeira is going to push Anthony Smith to the cage and try and keep it dirty boxing style. Sort of like old school, Randy Couture type grinding. But I think that Anthony Smith just has some firepower, son. I think that he has really, good strikes. He's long, and we've seen Glover sort of had trouble with longer fighters, such as Gustafsson and Jones. And Anthony Smith is a longer, rangier fighter, and I think that he can probably catch Glover. But Glover needs to keep the fight, I think he needs to keep the fight pushed up against the cage, make it dirty, make it gritty, make it nasty, and he could probably pull off the he could probably pull off the upset. But, that's a big but, I don't think he's going to do that. I think that Anthony Smith is one of the top light heavyweights in the world. He had a rough time against John Jones, but about everybody does besides, Thiago Santos or Gustafsson the first time. But, it's going to be a fun fight. I think that it's going to be a really fun fight, but I do have Anthony Smith winning this fight probably in the 3rd round by TKO. That's going to be my official. What the hell was I going to say? My official prediction. Damn, I'm a little off today, but I had a super long weekend of coaching wrestling. So bear with me while I try and stumble through this podcast. The next fight that we're going to talk about is one in the middleweight division, and that is Kevin Holland versus Jack Marshman. Kevin Holland is coming off a submission loss to Brendan Allen, but before that had secured 3 straight wins in the UFC, wins over John Phillips, Gerald Mearshart, and some guy named Alessio Di Chicarico back at UFC Moicano versus Korean Zombie. But he did lose back in October to Brendan Allen. But this fight is going to be at UFC London, March 21st. And this is a battle between 2 strikers. Speaking of middleweight division, Jack Marshman is coming off of a loss to a guy that we talked about probably like 5 minutes ago, and that is to Edmund Shabazian. He got submitted by rear naked choke in that fight. Previous to that, he beat John Phillips by split decision, but was stopped by Antonio Carlos Jr. And Thiago Santos a couple of fights before that. In the UFC, he has a win-loss, win-loss-loss, win-loss. So he's sort of back and forth on his wins and losses in the UFC. Kevin Holland came into the UFC off of a Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series contract win and was thrown right to the Wolves, and he fought Thiago Santos, which he lost unanimously to at UFC 227 back in August of 2018. And then he fought, John Phillips, and then had his 3-fight win streak snapped by Brendan Allen back in October at UFC Reyes versus Weidman. I think that Kevin Holland could take this fight to the ground. He has wins by knockout. He has wins by decision. 7 wins by knockout to be exact, 6 by submission, and 3 by decision. I don't think that he will have that big of an issue taking Jack Marshman down. Excuse me once again. So I think that the smart decision would be to look for those takedown opportunities against the more powerful striker in Marshman, and look to get it to the ground where he could set up a submission of some sort, or he can look to just grind out a decision victory. Not saying that he can't strike with Jack Marshman, but I do feel like he does have the edge on the ground. So I think that maybe his coaches are looking at that and can maybe implement a game plan in order to overshadow Marshman's striking and taking this to the ground and getting after it down there. But then that brings us to the end of the recently announced fights that I'm super pumped for. That brings us to talking about UFC Raleigh that just happened this past Saturday in Raleigh, North Carolina. That was headlined by Curtis Blades and Junior Dos Santos. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you the preliminary card and the main card results. If I see some fights that I was super pumped about, I'll let you know what I thought about those fights and where I think the fighters can go from there. Cut that. So, to start the night off on ESPN Plus, in the prelims, you had Herbert Burns versus Nathan Landwehr. Herbert Burns, I actually picked Nate Landwehr to win this one. Nate Landwehr's from Tennessee, and he was a very, very highly touted prospect coming into the UFC, but so is Herbert Burns. I thought Nate Landwehr would be able to work his boxing a little bit more. He actually hurt Herbert Burns and had him up against the fence, but that is where Herbert Burns threw that nasty knee that hit Landwehr and shut the lights off. That was a crazy finish, and he actually took home $50,000 for his performance that night. The next fight was in the UFC bantamweight division, which had Brett Johns defeating Tony Gravely via rear naked choke in the third round. That won both of those guys' fight of the night. I think that both fighters look pretty good. Brett Johns is a very, very highly touted submission grappler. Tony Gravely, first fight in the UFC after coming off of Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series win. He got thrown to a really tough guy whose only losses have come to top competition. And, this is not the end for Tony Gravely. I think that he's going to come in against, a lower-ranked guy than Brett Johns and find his way throughout the UFC and, build his way up. The next fight that was on the prelims was the return of former UFC bantamweight title challenger Sarah McMahon, where she defeated Lena Landsberg via unanimous decision. The fight after that was Montel Jackson, where he defeated Felipe Corrales via unanimous decision. And then the fight after that was Justine Kish versus Lucy Puldilova, where she defeated her by unanimous decision. And if you don't get the track record as to how the rest of these fights went, on the preliminary card, Arnold Allen defeated Nick Lentz via unanimous decision. And to top that off, you had Bevon Lewis defeating Daquan Townsend via unanimous decision. They were decent fights. The best fights on the prelims were Herbert Burns and Nate Landwehr the fight of Brett Johns versus Tony Gravely. Then we hopped into the main card where we saw Jamal Hill defeat Darko Stoichik via unanimous decision. And then we got into the second fight of the main card, which had one of my good pals, Angela Overkill Hill, getting the TKO victory over Hannah Cyphers. Angela Hill has been super, super active. I remember Angie whenever we used to train together in North Carolina, and she has grown leaps and bounds since she was on The Ultimate Fighter. I first met Angie back in 2014, I believe. 2014, we were training at a gym in North Carolina, and this is right whenever she fought Emily Kagan. Back in 2014 in December. But she has grown leaps and bounds since then. She's on a 2-fight win streak now, and she's just been staying active. She's had, since 2019, she had 5 fights. 5 fights since March of 2019, and she's been growing with every fight. I would love to see her fight against maybe a higher ranked opponent other than Hannah Cifers next. Hannah Cifers, she was on a 2-fight win streak before this fight, and she's not a bad fighter at all. She's in the UFC for a reason, but she seems to have some issues whenever people get her on the ground, such as Macy Barber. But Angela Hill, went in there, did the damn thing, and got the victory via elbows and punches. She was good on the mic. The North Carolina people were booing her. But, I'm super proud of Angie and look forward to seeing her fight again. The next fight was in the UFC flyweight division, which had Alex Perez defeating Jordan Espinoza via submission via arm triangle. Via arm triangle. Sorry if that was super loud in your ears. But yes, Alex Perez defeated Jordan Espinoza via technical submission via arm triangle in the first round. Alex Perez looked really good. Jordan Espinoza looked kind of flat. But Alex Perez, super good prospect in that UFC flyweight division. The co-main event of the night had Michael Chiesa defeating Rafael dos Anjos. I had this fight totally wrong. I had actually picked Rafael dos Anjos to go in there and get the win over Michael Chiesa, but Chiesa spoiled my plans and looked really, really good. He called out Colby Covington after his fight. How I feel about that call out, I think that, I would like to see maybe Michael Chiesa face the loser of Tyron Woodley versus Leon Edwards. I think that would be a really good fight for him to see how he fares against the top 5. I think that Colby Covington's pressure and his champion prowess would be a little bit too much too soon for Michael Chiesa, but I wouldn't be opposed to it headlining maybe a UFC Fight Night card in Oregon or something like that. I think both the guys are from Oregon, so dang, that was a good prediction from me. And then to top the night off in the main event, you had Curtis Blades defeating Junior Dos Santos via knees and punches in round 2. He looked really good, man. Curtis Blades has definitely grown since he's come into the UFC. I remember when he first came into the UFC, he was thrown in there against Francis Ngannou. That was back in 2016. And he lost the fight to Dr. Stoppage, reeled off like 6 fights. And, he looked really good. And then he fought Francis Ngannou again and lost via punches, and then has reeled off 3 straight as of last night. His only losses, like I said, came to like the number 1 fighter in the heavyweight division besides Daniel Cormier. So I think that he called for a title shot last night. I don't know how I feel about that one. I think DC and Stipe need to get it on before we throw, Curtis Blades into there. Maybe I could see him fighting. Let's see. Who could I see him fighting? I could see him fighting Rosenstreut. Rosenstreut is coming off of a win over Alistair Overeem, and is an undefeated prospect, man. That would be a fun fight for the UFC to put on, maybe as like the third fight on a UFC pay-per-view card, maybe coming up. But Rosenstreut is looking very good. He's reeled off consecutive wins over Junior Albini, Alan Crowder, Andrei Arlovsky, and Alistair Overeem in the UFC. He's 4-0 in the UFC, 10-0 altogether. And I think him versus Curtis Blades would be a really fun matchup. I think that Curtis Blades would be able to take down Rosenstreut, but, never count out Rosenstreut because he beat Alistair Overeem with 4 seconds left in the fight. But that brought an end to UFC Raleigh. It was a decent fight card overall. Wasn't my favorite. Wasn't my least favorite fight card of 2020. But, there was a lot of unanimous decisions. No fight really jumped out at me as like, oh my God, that was a great fight. But there were some great performances by some really good fighters. And for that, I am thankful for the UFC for putting on another stellar fight card on ESPN+. The next UFC fight card that we have is Jones versus Dom Reyes, and that is UFC 247 on February 8th. I'll be bringing you my predictions and all that good stuff next week, talking about that fight card. But we're going to talk about Bellator 238 And Bellator 238 happened last night, along with the UFC fights, and that was on DAZN, which is the streaming service that has all of the wonderful Bellator fights. And that fight card was pretty good, man. It wasn't bad. You had some really good performances by some fighters, and we're just gonna hop in talking about this fight card from bottom to top. In the prelims, you had Miguel Jacob defeating David Pacheco via unanimous decision. You had Anthony Taylor getting the decision win over Chris Avila. Anthony Taylor actually did the rock bottom in the cage after his win, which was pretty funny. I thought that was entertaining. Chris Avila is one of the Diaz brothers' training partners, one of their little prospects. Doesn't really have a good record. He's 7-9. Anthony Taylor was 6-5 at the start of this fight, so he's 7-5 right now. A decent fight. The next one was Curtis Millender, where he defeated Moises Murrieta, and he climbed to 18-5. Next fight, the fourth fight on the card, you had J.J. Wilson defeating Mario Navarro via submission in round number 2. And then the fifth fight, you had A.J. Agazaram, or however you say his name, the Florida boy. He defeated Adel Altamimi via submission in round 3. They were just trying to build this kid up. Then you hopped into another build-up, and that is my dude Aaron Pico getting the knockout victory over Daniel Carey. Aaron Pico looked very, very good last night. Came in there and showed that he still has bombs in his hands and can put anybody's lights out if he touches them on the chin. And that's what he did to Daniel Carey. The seventh fight of the night was Joshua Jones. He defeated Brandon Bender via decision. And then you hopped into the first fight of the main card, and that was Emily King versus Ava Knight. Ava Knight is a boxing world champ. She fought Emily King, and Emily King got the rear naked choke victory in round number 1. It was grappler versus striker, and Emily King got it to the ground and secured the rear naked choke and got the dub. You can't hate on it. It was a decent performance. She got the victory on a big card. But then hops into the next fight. Her husband was fighting. Jason King took on Raymond Daniels, and that was not a good night for Jason King. At least the King household got one dub last night, because it would not come in this fight. It had Raymond Daniels winning the fight in round 1 via TKO, via ground and pound. Man, it was a rough night for Jason King, man. He just looked a little, flat-footed. You could tell that maybe the Bellator lights got to him a little bit. The person standing across from him got to him a little bit. Just the pressure of being on the big show. And Raymond Daniels has been on the big show for a long time in kickboxing, and over in Glory, and then over here Bellator kickboxing, and now on Bellator MMA scene. And he climbed to 2-1 off of that TKO victory, and looked really good. He did what he does best, which is kickbox and stop the takedown. A couple of times, and just looked really good. It was a fun fight. And then that hopped into the third fight on the fight card, which was the third fight on the main card, which was Sergio Pettis making his Bellator debut against Alfred K. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that last name. Sergio Pettis, went in there 3 minutes into round number 1, secured the guillotine choke after he beat the shit out of his opponent. It could have been stopped on the feet. When he landed the punch on the feet, and then the kid dropped, and he just pounded him, and then he submitted him. Sergio Pettis looked good. I think it was a good tune-up fight for Bellator. He's going to be an exciting prospect in this Bellator bantamweight division, so I'm excited to see who he fights next. In the fourth fight of the main card, you had Juan Archuleta defeating Henry Corrales via unanimous decision. It was a very close fight, but Juan Archuleta went out there and got the dub, which brought us into the co-main event, which was a 5-round fight in the World Grand Prix, the Featherweight Grand Prix, which was Darian Caldwell against Adam Boric. And you had Darian Caldwell securing the rear naked choke victory in the first round. This fight, Darian Caldwell came out and just did what he wanted. He caught Boric with a nasty punch and then followed it up with some flying kicks, got the takedown, got the back position on Boric, secured his, I believe it was his right hand with his left, and sunk in a rear naked choke and submitted the undefeated prospect in the first round. Darian Caldwell looked super good last night, and he's fighting AJ McKee in the semifinals of the Grand Prix, which is going to be, as Rampage Jackson used to say, black on black crime, and I am super pumped for that fight. I'll give you my predictions whenever that fight comes up, but Darian Caldwell looked really good, and I'm excited for his next fight. Which brings us into the main event of Bellator 238, which was Chris Cyborg versus Julia Budd. Chris Cyborg was looking to do the Grand Slam title dance last night. She has won the Strikeforce, Invicta, and UFC featherweight titles, and she was looking to add one more to her mantle last night, and she did that so successfully, defeating Julia Budd in the fourth round of their 5-round fight. She defeated her by punches, especially a nasty shot to the body, which dropped Julia Budd. I had Chris Cyborg up on all judges' scorecards. Just my scorecard, but I had her up on my scorecard 3-0 before that. Chris Cyborg went out there, kept the pressure, didn't really let Julia Budd move, looked decent on the ground, got out of some bad positions, and implemented her game plan, which was keep the pressure and keep the fight a Chris Cyborg fight. She went out there and delivered. And I'm super pumped, man. I'm a big fan of Chris Cyborg. I remember watching her in Strikeforce with my grandpa. And, we were just like, holy shit, this lady's like massive. She's so powerful. Because back in the day, you had your girls fights that weren't that exciting. And then you see a girl like Cyborg go out there and just maul these girls. And, she's been doing it for so long. And unfortunately, she took that loss to Amanda Nunes, but seems to have grown from that loss. And I was super pumped to see her win the fight last night, man. And congratulations to her. And, man, she's a part of history for winning all 4 major MMA organizational titles in the featherweight women's division. But that is where we are going to end today's podcast. Next week, I'm going to talk about the upcoming UFC fight. I'll bring you guys some more announced fights and talk to you about those. Let's see, is there anything else that we got to say? Oh, the Fat Boy Fight Club website is up. Head over to fatboyfightclub.com. The UFC, not the UFC, but our YouTube channel is Fat Boy Fight Club. So make sure that you share, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram at Fat Boy Fight Club. The same thing on Twitter. And thank you guys for tuning into this episode. This is episode number 6. We're four more and we'll have episode number 10. But make sure that you also go check out our merch. The merch link is on our website. It is on the Instagram. It is in the description of our YouTube videos. So go buy some merch. Check out our Instagram for some pictures of the merch and all that good stuff. But if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Fat Boy Fight Club podcast. I'm your host, Andre Roy. And until next time, enjoy the fights. Peace.